Let's talk a little bit about how Americans do feel about
There
this
you go.
country we live in and the institutions governing this country that we live in. The picture is pretty dire. Put this up on the screen from Gallup. Historically low faith in U.S. institutions continues. And effectively, they don't find much change year over year. It's pretty flat in terms of public confidence in 11 of the 16 institutions that Gallup tracks annually. They had seen significant declines. Presidency and the Supreme Court suffered the most. The share of Americans expressing a great deal or fair amount of confidence in these had previously fallen 15 and 11 percentage points respectively, and those numbers have basically remained unchanged. Now, they do go on to note that the survey was conducted before this latest slate of Supreme Court rulings came down. Those, of course, impacted affirmative action, college loan forgiveness, LGBTQ plus Americans, their rights and how they intersect with religious values. So possible that the Supreme Court ratings change a bit after those, but generally speaking, Americans felt pretty bad about these institutions. They continue to feel pretty bad about these institutions. And, to tie in the Joe Scarborough conversation and some of this wonk fight that's going on, there's this very anti-populist, very elitist attitude of Americans are just confused. They don't understand how great our institutions actually are. They don't understand how well things are really going in the economy. They just don't get what a great leader Joe Biden actually is. And if they just, if we just got rid of the misinformation and the bad actors and we just were able to message properly and get the word out about how actually good their lives are, then they wouldn't feel this way about any of these things. So, when I look at these numbers and trust in our institutions, on the one hand, it's sad because you would like to have institutions worthy of trust. On the other hand, I look at it and I think it's a sign of societal health that there is a recognition that these institutions have failed, that in many instances they have been corrupt. I mean, just look at some of the things we've been covering with the Supreme Court and the level of deep, just institutionalized rot and corruption, which has been accepted now for years and years. I think it's a sign of health and a positive development that Americans have accurate views of these various institutions.
Yeah, so the all-time low, I think this is really interesting, for several institutions was actually hit. And let me read you what they are in 2023. And I think these are all correct. Big business, large technology companies, public schools, Congress. Those are the places that hit it in 2020, or the police in 2023. Now, if you look at the rest of them, many were also hit in 2022. The presidency, the criminal justice system, television news, the U.S. Supreme Court, newspapers, church and/or organized religion. As you said, Krystal, I think it's a sad story. I wish that people had more faith in all of these well-established institutions in American life, which genuinely had some good in the past. But a core theme of our show is about the corruption of these institutions at the expense of some of the lowest and most vulnerable amongst us. And I think it is correct that the vast majority of people should turn on these institutions and should question whenever they say, hey, this is why we need a tax break. This is why we're doing so well. And, this is the actual consequence of really decades, not only of partisanship, but of our economic policy. And it actually, as I, talked about previously, the American Carnage speech, and really, many of the campaigns of the 2016, the successful ones, was the pointing to the actual ills which face us into these institutional numbers. And then, look, I'm not saying Trump did anything about it, but he acknowledged the problem. And really, the smartest Democrats I see are also willing to acknowledge it as well. I'm no fan of Chris Murphy or anything, but I was fascinated to see him try to wade into masculinity discourse and what can we do about faith in institutions and all of that. Buttigieg, look, I think he's an incompetent fool, but even he can read the tea leaves around if you want a future, you have to be able to speak to the deep despair, I think, that falls all the way from upper to middle class. That's another, or upper to lower class. I think that's a key part here of the story, which is These institutions we're talking about here are not at like 50%. For example, big business has a 14% approval rating.
Yeah.
That's stunning. That means the vast majority of people are against it. Large technology, 26. Public schools, 26. Think about what a death knell that is for public education. Public education was at one time one of the shining lights of the way that Americans felt about the shared institution that was federalist, local, state, federal connected. They felt a real connection to that. For the vast majority of people to turn against public schooling, that is not a good thing. That means that they literally have no trust in the ability for these institutions to carry on their legacy. And it explains school voucherization, the rise in public schools, and many of the pushes away because they're like, we don't trust you at all. And again, I only want to sit here and just vindicate that and be like, I agree, you shouldn't trust them. I want to see an alternative, but for many of these that I see on the list, I think you're a fool to put any of your faith in any of them.
Yeah, I think the big tech example is an interesting one because I guarantee you the numbers during like the Obama years when, it was there was a lot of tech optimism, right? And these companies were seen as like the good guys and they were on the vanguard and they were like part of these democracy movements and whatever. It is a better state of affairs, in my opinion, for people to understand the problems with these massive tech monopolies that have so much control over our public discourse and over all of our lives. I think it's a good thing that we have the bloom is off the rose, so to speak, and people have a more clear-eyed view of what some of the benefits, but also challenges and problems and the way that it has been corrosive to society. So I think that's, I think it's a good thing that banks have seen trust fall off to 26%. I think it's a good thing that television news trust is at 14% and big business trust is at 14%. Because when I look at these numbers, I feel like, all right, they can only hold back the waters for so long before the dam breaks, before there is some movement or some candidate or some combination of things that breaks through and changes things for the better, because you just can't sustain this distance between, the happy talk of Joe Scarborough and the, Beltway wonks and whatever, and the reality of how people view the country, the institutions, the economy, and the prospects for their lives and the lives of their children.
Yeah, and also whenever I look at the chart, there's a very clear story here. The last time that we had even, moderately high level of confidence in major U.S. institutions was 2003 and 2004. What happened? Oh, I forgot. The Iraq War.
Interesting.
Yeah, shocker. People dropped their amount of faith in U.S. institutions. And then also there's a sad story. The modern high is 36% in 2020. Why? Because of the feeling of let's all come together during COVID. Then none of those institutions actually did anything for us and they fell apart and broke. And now we're at the all-time low. The last time that Americans had confidence in the presidency was before Vietnam. I mean, can you blame them for not having confidence? And, afterwards, they're not wrong to continue to drop. So I think I see a consistent and a proper story, which is genuinely small d democratic. And I think that there is only one actual way to fix any of this, which is enacting good policy, good politics, and to try and shift away from where we are right now to get to some sort of consensus. But that's way, way harder, easier, I think, said than done.
How dare you criticize America instead of offering a muscular defense, Saagar?
Yeah, I can give it a great defense, compared to somebody else.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that I can't look inward as well.
Yes, indeed, of course.
Right.
Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.